Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer Van Ostrin, and on behalf of ACRL and Choice, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, The Evolution of Research Management and the Role of the Library, sponsored by ProQuest and featuring Eric Van Gordon. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from ACRL and Choice that addresses new ideas, developments, and products of interest to the academic library community. Free to users, these structured 60-minute live presentations provide the opportunity for interactive discussions of important new issues and developments in academic librarianship by librarians, vendors, authors, and other interested stakeholders. Before we get started, I'd like to point out a few features of the webinar software. In the main area of the screen, you can follow along with the presentation materials. Along the left-hand side, you will also see a Q&A panel that you can use to submit questions or comments. We will spend some time responding to your questions during the program, so please feel free to submit these throughout. You'll notice that there will be some poll questions displayed throughout the session today, so feel free to respond to these at any time. We're also going to be including some helpful web links and files for download during today's webcast, so keep an eye out for those resources. And finally, please note that today's program will be recorded and all registrants will receive follow-up instructions on how to access the archived version. Our speaker today is Eric Van Gordon. Eric is the Senior Product Manager of Research Solutions within ProQuest. In this role, he supports the Refworks product line, which now includes Flow, a cloud-based research management and collaboration solution from ProQuest. He is focused on customer-driven development of these products, ensuring that customer needs are met by these solutions. He has been with ProQuest for 15 years, 13 of which have been working with licensing content from academic publishers. With that, I'd like to turn things over to Eric.
Thanks, Jen. I'm hoping everybody can hear me okay. I'll make sure I project it and I keep my voice loud for everybody on the phone today, as loud as possible. I'm going to jump right into the agenda. We've got a lot we want to do in the time we have together. And so just a brief overview of what I'm going to speak about today. I'm going to do just a brief history of reference management and really the evolution to research management. I mean, there's certainly been a movement from one type of product category to another, and I want to talk a little bit about that today on this call. The emergence of user self-selection of those kind of tools. There's definitely been some changes in how those types of tools are adopted in the marketplace and where those decision points are being made. I'd like to cover that. A little bit of the old and the new. What makes research management different from reference management? How are these two things different? How do they sit side by side? And how do you as an institution really manage this motion, this forward motion of users? And then I want to talk about defining research ecosystems, and specifically what we at ProQuest are doing to try to address the various user needs and to really define a way that users can engage with tools and content in a more seamless way. I want to talk about the researcher and the admin, the role the researcher plays, and the role that we see the institution playing in that process as well, and how the two complement each other. And then we're going to do a little bit of live wire. I'm going to do some live demos of the ways that we in our new Flow product are handling some of those issues, some of the integrations we have taken on in order to really help foster a better research process. So just a brief look back. I mean, it really is evolutionary. The earliest mention I could find of really a tool in the space was to Reference Manager circa something like 1984. I'm not sure what system folks were using back then, but these things date back. I mean, really, when you talk about the tools that we know today, it begins in the early 2000s with EndNote, product that I also managed, Refworks in 2001, and then moving forward. And certainly Flow is not the end of that line, but one of the more recent products. So there's been a motion, and if I drew this out as a family tree, what you would see is just tendrils going all over the place. Lots of products growing out of a few core products in the early days. So really a proliferation of these types of products gauged mostly towards end users. But it has been evolutionary, a movement, if you think from just managing references to managing much more complex types of data, and really, interacting with lots more products that users are using on a day-to-day basis. So it has been that sort of evolutionary change from a single and simple tool to something more heavy. Let's talk a little bit about not just that evolution, but some of those adoption methods. In the early days, and even until fairly recently, it was very common for the adoption of these tools to be driven solely by the institution, by the library. You guys made a purchase decision. That purchase decision flowed out to others in your institution. That world has changed, though. We now have, a real disruptive space where there are free tools available. You have end users adopting those tools. Maybe they're advocated and supported by the library. Maybe they're not. So the world has become a complex place, and we're going to talk a little bit about how those two things align. When, at first blush, they appear to stand contrary to one another, almost as though a decision by an institution stands in opposition to one by the end users. I like to posit that there's a different way we can leverage those two user groups, those two seemingly opposing forces in some ways, to really be aligned, and how to help foster that adoption of product that the end user is seeing along with that institutional adoption, and really tie those two things together. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that today as well. And I'd just like to say that, a lot of these issues we're seeing are not new. If you think back, and we think about what Google was meaning to the library and to the research space, it became that place, and still is, where researchers begin that research. It was disrupting that market, that one-to-one database. And what, I think we all realize, and what librarianship realized is, you can't stay out of that fight. At some level, you want to address web-scale search. So along came web-scale discovery, right? Really keeping the library's hat in that game, being able to search across a wide body of content, a wide body of better content in many cases, to get an answer. Something we've seen before. It's not something new. I'd like to posit that user-selected research management tools also shows a new model for institutional involvement. This is not, it could be, but it is not about library disintermediation. It really is an opening for the library to find a new way to work with users and to work with these tools. So a little bit of the old and the new. The little red bubbles going around are, if I think back to the early days of Refworks and what users were primarily doing, you're, number one, writing a paper. You're discovering and managing your content, so you're going out to services, you're bringing that data together, making sense of it, editing it, primarily metadata driven. You're storing and organizing. Maybe you're attaching a PDF to that item, or just sort of keeping things together. And there's a little bit of sharing and collaboration. Maybe you're sharing a set with somebody else, but really that's sort of what you were doing. The big change that I see, and that I think we all acknowledge, is that when you go from reference management to research management, the big shift here is the presence of full text. That all of that data now centers around the full text item. That can be a PDF, that can be a video, it can be any sort of material that a user wants to keep as part of their research. And that really changes the game when you go from just talking about metadata to really bringing that full text in, the annotation of that data, the collaboration in real time on that data. And I'm going to show a little bit of that today in the demos. But I just want to set it up that when I think of one major shift that goes on here, it is the movement from metadata-driven products to full text-driven products. And that really does complicate the world. You think about copyright concerns. You think about sharing concerns that come along with that full text. It's a significant shift that goes on when the full text becomes the center of the universe. And it very much is the center of that universe. So user self-selection. I mean, beyond the library space, freemium, the notion that there's something for free that you can then buy up into is not new. I mean, it's become fairly common for us to see products all over the marketplace in all different spaces that function in this way. And obviously the goal is to drive large amounts of free users who are then converting to something above and beyond, either buying music, buying more storage, buying a way to keep moving through a game. Those are all very common things that we in our own lives sort of expect and experience and interact with. It is absolutely no different here. But I'd also like to say that that user self-selection, even if we looked at sort of some of the polls that were in the lobby when we came onto the call, one of the chief challenges that I think we all see in the space, if we're driving from the inward side of things, is getting those users, getting them engaged with these products. So I'd like to say that harnessing the openness of these products is something that is noble, is something we should be going after. And again, bringing those users in and finding creative ways to move them through the products is the key. So my thought here is large numbers of users on common tools equals larger value for the library. It really does. But, and this is important, it takes more than a single product to achieve that. And that's where we really talk about ecosystems. And I'm going to show you sort of our diagram for ecosystems as we go through and how we begin to visualize what we expect a user to do, what we expect a user's needs will be, and how products need to tie together to address those needs. So if I think about an open product like, say, Flow, where we're able to drive a volume of users, that's great. And that does translate into value for the library through data, but the real value also translates through, okay, so how does that product then interact with databases, the open web, and other services that you may be offering to your constituents or that they are using in their research process? That's really the critical piece of all of this. So thinking about product vision, this is a graphic I've used many times, but it really does tell a story that I think gets to the heart of what we're trying to achieve both at ProQuest and in our product vision. So if you look at the little red lines going around the center here, moving from the top right, if we try to think of this sort of as a cyclical process, from the defining phase of a research project, and that could be conceptualizing or funding, moving through the discovery phase and organizing, consuming, what I've tried to show here is how I begin to conceptualize aligning products around that, because I think that's how you have to think about it. It's not really linear. They're not disconnected. This experience for users really has to be seen as seamless. So from something like our pivot product, which fits at the defining stage where you're finding funding, you're coming up with that idea, you're finding what other research is going on in that space, moving into deep discovery with Summon, the ProQuest platform proper, and eBrain, those other core products. I mean, that's by and large where ProQuest has spent most of its life in that one bubble. It's been the core of us, but it again is not really sufficient to do the whole job. But again, moving from that definition to discovery. Then with the entry of something like Flow, it's, okay, now once I've found this stuff, once I know where I've located it, what do I do with it? Where does it go? So how do I organize my thinking? How do I bring that stuff into one place, make sense of it? How do I consume it? How am I reading that full text? Where am I reading that full text? And how am I tracking my thoughts about that full text material? Moving through to collaborating. Now that I kind of have my thoughts about it, how am I working with others? We know research is becoming more and more collaborative. So what common tools am I using to achieve that collaboration? How am I sharing that reading experience and that annotation experience, to be very specific, with others? And how are we working together? And then how are we authoring? How are we taking that data and using that data to produce a dissertation, a paper, a piece of research? And are we able to tie that clearly to the tools we're using back up that channel? Why move from a sharing and collaboration tool and then take that data away and decouple it in order to write? It is less and less necessary to do so, and I'd like to show you guys exactly how we're solving some of those problems. And then ultimately moving into some phases of planning for us, which is, how do I deal with open access publishing, peer reviewing, really then ultimately bringing that to market and submission, a place we will be going with Flow and other tools around ProQuest to complete this circle, to complete this research ecosystem. Also want to throw out that, it's not sufficient. I think every publisher out there, every major vendor out there has a diagram that looks very much like this. I've seen lots of versions of this thing over the past few years. And, I think the one thing it's important to always keep your eye on is not to be a closed system, right? I mean, that's not how our users behave. That's not how researchers behave. They don't just use a finite set of tools. They're always stretching outside of those tools. So it's important along the way, and those are the little green things I sort of illustrate around the edge, is to make sure that those tools work with that ecosystem, with what that user wants to do. That if they want to use Google Docs to author, that you're getting there. That if they want to integrate something with Dropbox, you're getting there. Just being in touch with and having the tools be comfortable with those sorts of workflows. Just another thing, just to reference that having a closed system is really not an ideal either. But I know everybody's got a graphic sort of like this, and so what you see is an emerging theme there. It also speaks a bit to why major publishers, when you think about the press releases and look at these sort of workflow tools, um, I think it's almost the norm for publishers and aggregators like ourselves to have a tool that, like the Flow, that is really researcher-centric. Now, why is that important to everyone? Well, obviously if you have the researcher and you have their eyeballs and you have their attentions and you have their commitments, the content follows. It's easier to get them to download that content and to integrate with that. So this sort of illustrates why so many publishers out there are chasing down these kinds of tools and why they've become so very valuable, I think, to lots of folks. It's sort of becoming the norm that these tools are the center of that publishing and user universe. Let's show a little different graphic here. I talked a little bit about what we consider to be a critical partnership, and that is the partnership between librarians and researchers. You know, my goal with our products, and I know our corporate goal with our products, is to keep both of those constituents tightly coupled, joined, that there really is a joint venture. And that joint venture is centered around a few key things: content, data, and technology. So you think about our content services and the ability for users to sort of source that content from one place, again, core to what ProQuest has always been historically. The data that's generated by the use of that content, be it from what content is most popular at your institution, what is being most cited, all the way through that process, the analytics around that, critical to that side of it. And then, what technology is being used to deliver that content and that data to your users and to yourselves. So those three sort of components tying those two constituents together. I'm going to just let this thing play out for a second, and we'll talk about a little bit about, again, this another view of that ecosystem a little bit, which is, again, sort of where things lie. So if a researcher is going after something and discovering something, you have a moment there as a librarian, as an institution, to step in and provide that guidance, provide the right content, the right search, the right result against that material. Then obviously the consumption of that material, the use and collaboration of it, guides assessment. What is most used? What is most valuable? What could I provide to these users that would enhance that experience or make their research easier? And all of that obviously generates data, generates information about what is most important to that process, what is really being used, and what is being produced, as far as what items are making it into that document that was published. And that ultimately influences the acquisition and management of the data that you're providing on a day-to-day basis. So it is that cyclical thing that, one feeds the other. The researcher feeds that data, the librarian feeds that information back and that guidance back in the form of data analysis, in the form of guidance around what is the right thing to use in that moment, really to help inform that entire process. That's very much how we see it. And I just sketched out some products down below there that I believe, at our organization, are focused with that very much in mind, both in content and also in sort of the providing of information back to the library around what is happening in the institution. So that's my basic setup. I want to dive deeper. I think, I always think it's great on these things when we get that sort of setup and people talk in conceptual ways about product and where things are going. But I really do like to get into the products and do that demo, a little bit of that high wire act. I think it helps ground your thinking and my own discussion in specifics, why something happens a certain way, why a product behaves the way it does, and why it was brought to market that way. So with that, what I'd like to do is step into some live demos, and they're going to hand me some screen sharing so that I can do that. Just bear with me a second. And I'll let everything catch up so you guys can see my screen. Excellent. So this is the basic Flow UI. And I thought a lot about today about, in the time I have with you, what I wanted to show. And I really want to focus on integrations and that path. But I thought it was worth just a little bit of explanation around, why Flow looks the way it does, what it means, and where we started. The first thing with the product that we really felt was important was to make it easily usable and engageable. Really have a way for users to sit down in front of a product and train themselves into it. So Flow's UI is very simple. It's basically a list of collections that you can create and manage with a couple key tabs around, recent views of things, all documents, and then the ability a little bit around sharing we'll talk about. The content's always at the center. We always wanted to keep users' content in front of them. We didn't want them to feel like they had to go hunting for things. So if I click on an item, you can see the little icons for full text. Being able to easily display both the inspector, what is here, being able to seamlessly go in and read a document right within the context of the product. So if I'm here and I'm reading a document, I want to make a comment, it's easy for me to highlight that item. I can even have some controls over the color of the highlighting to add a note. Like that. And even when you're reading, this is actually new for us, to be able to edit right while you're here. So, here you are staring at a PDF you've brought in. We all know that tools like this, nothing's going to be 100% accurate. So even when you're reading, you can come in and edit that metadata anywhere you want, add fields, change the type of item it is, and see related fields. So again, simplicity though. Simplicity at all times, and content-centric, being right at the center of their universe. Save that. I want to talk about workflow, really. I really want to talk about how users are engaging with these products and how open they have to be. So here I am. I'm on PubMed Central, and I'm just going to run a query here. So then they get a result list. And it's very typical for us to have experiences as users historically where I get this result. You see this little send to button up here. Some are more useful than others. I know from our Refworks experience, we've got direct exports embedded all over the place. So when you click this, you would see Refworks. That's great, but it's two things. One, it's highly customized by site. It's not a universal experience. Different wherever you go, and it's also only dealing with metadata. It's not full text centric. And if you remember back to what I was saying when we came onto the call, one of the things that we know users expect, and that really they should expect in situations is, hey, if I have rights to that full text, if I can see that full text, I really want to be able to go get that full text. And so if you look at something like this article here, you can see there's a PDF there. What we've developed in Flow, and this is something very much that will be improving over time and increasing over time, is really a tool that's ubiquitous, that works anywhere you happen to be sitting. So this right now happens to be a bookmarklet, something you easily drag and drop. But you can see a couple things happen, and this is really what I want to talk about, is that, number one, we're able to see the metadata on that specific page. We also know that there's a PDF there, and so we ask if you would like to save that as well. The other thing that was critical in this moment is that you can edit. Being able to see something and change something prior to bringing it to your account is key. Our first release of this functionality didn't have that edit capability. It just was very magical. And when it was 100%, it was awesome. And when it was not 100%, it was just disappointing. So, one of the things we've learned, and that I think, when you look across the vast wide array of sites that are out there, you have to be is informational. Informational at all times. Let a user know what you've got and give them a chance to change it. Give them that moment. It may be a little bit less magical, but it's also going to be a lot more useful. And that for us has been a key with a product like Flow, something new and in market. You always have the tendency on the product side to want to push as far forward as you can, and and then be gently or not so gently reminded that maybe you ran a little too far ahead. Just help me in the moment, do what I need to do. But again, the change here is from that very guided or very specific saving This is a tool meant to work across a wide array of sites to really change that workflow, to change how a user is engaged with content. We know you're going to Google. We know you're going to lots of different sites. What happens when you're there? How does a product interact with you in that moment? Does it require you to have a specific download? That's really inconvenient. If there's nothing there, what do? You try to create an RIS file or something and upload it, and okay, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Um, User expectations are changing, and the products that support them need to change as well. And so something like this Save the Flow bookmarklet, soon to be a browser extension, really allows us to change that game, to make one simple process that will work across a wide array of research sites, really being in that moment with the researcher and informative. So we'll save this one. And again, it's very, it has to be simple. It can't require a lot of work. So that's one. That's really us touching that open web, touching that moment where the user's out there, they're ranging around, and how does a product interact with them? Another one. So I talked a little bit about web scale discovery as sort of the institutional antidote to sort of that Google search. One of the first things we did at ProQuest when Flow was launched and came to market was powerfully realize that this was like chocolate and peanut butter with Summon. Really, the two products should go together. They're meant to be with each other. So again, I'll run the same query here. And so we began some integrations. And what we have live today is really the first phase of a multi-phase integration. But it was important on a couple fronts. One, here I am, I'm in Summon 2.0. As a user, I can save items, and they go into this little temporary folder right here. And so again, once I'm in that temporary folder, I have a couple export options, kind of the same thing we looked at before. I get a couple drop-downs here, or I can print an email. Again, that's nice, but at the end of the day, how does this thing really interact with me? It's making me take it away. It's making me take that data away from the service and do something that's disconnected or disjointed. Now, if that's what you want to do, you can certainly do that. But we thought there would be a better way to sort of have a persistent place, where a persistent and consistent experience for that user, and that would be Flow. So now there's this little login. Click the little login button. You can see I'm now in a logged in state. Basically, my Flow account has been joined with my Summon instance here. And I wouldn't say Summon account because you really don't have a Summon account prior to this. There was no notion of a user account, a consistent place where a user saved data. So now if I take those same two items and I click that folder, I'm going to end up right in Flow. And that data will be there for me. And then the full power of Flow is available to me. So I'll resort this. So now you can see those two items I just added. And again, I have the complete ability to edit that data. If I wanted, I could easily create a bibliography with that data. I can export it. I have all these controls that Flow brings with one click. If I want to go back to Summon, I just click back to my library search, and I'm right back in my result list right where I was, right where I left off. So a couple things. Our goal here is, this is a beginning. This is not an ending. Right now, that is metadata. I've talked about the promise of full text and really needing to be there. That's what we're working on right now, bringing over the full text of that data in certain cases. The first case will be when we know you have a ProQuest database that's supporting that material. So again, that was the beginning of those ties. You're going to see deeper ties between those two products over time because it just makes sense. The other thing I want to point out, because this has been in the market for a little while and we certainly listen to feedback, we're very centered on that, is, this is configurable by the institution. If for some reason you don't want to have those Flow accounts for your user, as an admin in Summon, you can turn those off. And as a user, if I don't want always to go to Flow when I want to view that full text, if I just want a quick view of that, all I need to do is log out. And again, I'm going to go right back to my temp folder state. So I can be just like I was before when I go through and save those items. I'll have the same level of exports and control that I always had. So again, it was to offer that promise, but not to get in the way of those users and to slow them down. So again, a critical integration for us really talks about how we're beginning to build that ecosystem. So if you think about, the first one I showed, which was easily saving from multiple places on the web. Now, web scale discovery tying into that research tool. I'm going to talk about two other things with you guys. One is obviously when I showed that chart at the beginning, we have Refworks in the marketplace, well adopted, well embedded. It's been there for almost 15 years at this point. Very different kind of tool, though. I mean, if we look at the user interface here versus Flow, very different. Lots of touch points, lots of critical overlap, but a different level of user engagement, a different level of training that's required to engage in this sort of product, which means that its user base is slightly different, smaller, maybe not as many younger students, maybe not as adoptable by today's generation of very, very Google-centric users. It just speaks to a different set of users. For us, though, really looking at a product like this and the hundreds of thousands of users that are currently on it was, how do we begin to plot paths forward? How do we move from one product to another? How do users move from one product to another? So when we thought about Refworks and we thought about Flow and these two products in the marketplace, one of the first things that was critical for us was having a great migration path from one product to another, from Refworks to Flow. And it was not sufficient for us to just say, okay, you're going to generate a folder of data, you're going to take it away, and you're going to upload it. I mean, we knew people have put years into these accounts, into nesting their folders right, into attaching items, into doing really detailed work with those accounts. So again, being able to, I'm being told that we lost screen share. Sorry, guys. Going back. Are we back now? Excellent. Thank you. Sorry about that. When we thought about Refworks and we thought about the user interface here, I'll back up a little bit since you weren't seeing it when I was saying it, it's just a very different look and feel from Flow, which I showed earlier. So when we get into the migrations, we wanted to be able to bring all of this data over, all of the folder structures. So from an institutional side, we have this little button up here, Institutions Can Enact. It talks about moving to Flow. And I just want to show off, I'm not going to do a full migration, I just wanted to show off how that process works. So let's give it a second here. Okay, so once you click that button, what we wanted to do was give that user guidance, first and foremost. So when you're in the institutional setting, that has been enacted. Again, that's something that the institution chooses to turn on, and the user clicks on this button, they're given these choices. So again, it's that union of the institution making a decision, I want to make something available, and then making it available for research or decision. Okay, I want to come over, what is this thing, how does it work? Really giving that guidance to the user in that moment around what this means to them. What are the high points of this product, and why should I as a user adopt it? Why would I move away from something to something else? So really trying to get that promise out there to users and let them really engage with the product and make that decision. What you're going to see from us in the coming year is even more Refworks and Flow alignment. We listen again to the users and to the feedback from librarians like yourselves on the phone, and it's one of those things, one of those key questions that we're in the process of answering is really how we're going to bring these two worlds together in a more strong way and really get the marketplace behind and moving forward into what is really a next generation product as well. Let me go back over here. I just want to make sure the sharing is still working. Okay, back over here. So the last and not least here I want to talk about, or integration I want to talk about, is Google Docs. When we were looking at Flow, and we were looking at the promise that Flow has for integrations, one of the key areas that's under-addressed in the marketplace was authoring. We, for years, have had an integration with Microsoft Word called Write Insight in Refworks. It's installed software. It's beautiful when it's installed and running, but it comes with all of those challenges of installed software. And so, we've always fought that fight. We will continue to fight that fight around making great software that's installed, that integrates well with a web tool. But we saw an emergence. We saw a change taking place. And that was that, something like Google Docs, which was really centered around collaborative writing, had some holes. And one of them was real good integrations with a tool like Flow. And we had thoughts around how we were going to engage with Google and discuss approaching and really crafting some relationship to bring our tool together with theirs. And right around that time, they decided to open up add-ons for Google Docs. And that changed the game for us. That went from something that was a discussion to something we could develop against immediately. And that's what we did. So earlier this year, we announced an add-on for Google Docs. And I'm just going to show you guys, number one, how it behaves, and then a little bit of how it works for us and what I think it means long term. So there's this little add-ons tab right here in Google Docs. And I have it installed out. I can show you guys how the Get Add-ons works. It's just a simple box. And it's going to look like a little app store. So you'll see there's EasyBib there. Product. So it's simple. It's not the same installation issues that we've known. It's literally one click and you're done to get add-ons. Once you have an add-on, you get these little drop-downs. So all I do is click ProQuest Flow and say that I want to manage citations. It's going to let you know it's working. And what you're going to see here in a second once everything loads up is that I have all of my references. I'm going to have all of my folders, everything available to me right on the side as I'm writing. So in real time, I've got all my data. There's my folder structure from my account. I've got lots of silly collections. But I can go into any of those collections and then simply just finding a place to select, and insert a citation. You'll see it'll say formatting for a second, and then it's going to do that insert of that item. I could also choose to edit in that moment. We'll just pick another item here. So again, having that moment to let that user see how that data is going to appear in the bibliography, select a page range. Again, I can suppress author if it's a continuing item, all those things. I'll show you guys how you can change styles as well. But again, being very informational, very in the moment, right in front of that user. And of course, when I'm doing these inserts, I'm also automatically generating my works editor bibliography at the same time. It's also trivial to change your style. And Flow has over 3,000 styles available. All of them are available here as well. All I need to do is begin searching, and I can pick one of my 6 favorites. Just something to change it. You'll see that everything changes automatically, including my works cited at the bottom, which is now references. Now the power of this, here I am, I'm working by myself, but really, Google Docs and Flow are meant to be collaborative tools. They're meant for you to collaborate on that full text, meant for you here to write in a collaborative way. So what I ask you to sort of envision is I have my Flow account. I'm sharing this document with 5 other writers. Each of us can use our separate Flow accounts to put items in. We don't have to share them with each other. We can just work as a team from our own set of materials. If we chose to share a collection in Flow and work from that, we could do that too. We really have complete control over how we interact with our authoring and with the data we're bringing to that particular paper in that moment. It's that fully collaborative moment. Again, done simply, elegantly, and with very little effort, I can do this work. What I begin to see here, and I think it's, simplifying these workflows, is I could be kind of back at square one, where you're clicking Save to Flow, saving these items to my account. Everything is updated in real time. You don't have to refresh anything. So I could be sitting on this tab, saving, 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 and coming over here, going into my all references, and just immediately citing those items. I don't even have to go into Flow and organize that stuff if I didn't want to. If I'm a student and I just want to have a behavior of gathering and using, I can do that. Why go somewhere else and organize them? You can always do it later, or maybe you don't want to do it at all. That's okay. So again, I think about that workflow. I constantly come back to that visual and think, how can you simplify that process for the user? How can you make that more useful for them? And then at the end of the day, help them produce that work. And it's not incidental to the librarians. I want it to feel sort of tied together. So as a Flow administrator, what does all this mean to me? At one level, it means information. And so if I want to go into, let's do something like this, basic breakdowns. But if I want to go into cited, so what items in the last 90 days were cited by, let's pick a researcher, and that, you can begin to facet things down. And my account's a little odd because it's one of our internal ones, but you can begin to facet against every sort of role and discipline and department specific to your institution. When users sign up, we are very critical about the data they fill out. Very much, we lead in with those questions. They don't have to answer them. They can ignore them, but most people will self-identify. And the reason for that is not just so we have random data. We want the analytics here to be as useful to the institution as possible, so that when you're looking at any bit of data that we're providing and the faceting that we're putting across it, you can begin to see everything about that data in the most specific way possible. That's certainly our goal, and how you make all of this sort of come back to the library, back to the users, back to the library. It is that connectedness that we want. Really, both are necessary. And it's why Flow is available as a personal edition. There's a free version that can be adopted, and an institutional version. And the analytics are part of that institutional version, as are some controls that the administrators have over setting up your link resolvers and other controls. And we'll be doing a lot more with that in the coming months as well. But I just wanted to show that because it really is sort of at the center of that workflow and how we see these tools functioning across the space. It's not just sufficient to, only focus on users and ignore the library, or vice versa. You really need both constituents in partnership to help drive this forward and to have it make sense for users. With that, and what I would like to do is open it up for questions. Jessica, one of my colleagues, is going to moderate for us, so she'll be able to read the questions that have been asked, and then everyone will be able to hear them, and I'll be able to answer them. So a little bit like a Q&A interview, if you will. And then we'll take it from there. So Jessica, if you wouldn't mind, tee up some questions.
All right. We did get several questions, Eric. The first is, can Flow create a standalone bibliography or an annotated bibliography?
Yes, Flow can create a standalone bibliography. We're working on annotated bibliography right now. It's a major feature request that's come back from the marketplace and something we're going to be working on in the next couple months. But standalone bibliographies in any of those 3,000 styles you can absolutely do. From any collection you choose, selections of items in that collection, anything like that, you can absolutely manage to generate bibliography that way.
Okay, the next question is about the bookmarklet on public and shared computers. How
Yes.
would that work?
The bookmarklet on public or shared computers is tied to you being logged into your account. So, I mean, we obviously want to encourage users to log out of an account when they're done using it, but the bookmarklet will reattach. You don't have to reinstall it. Leave it there. The next person who logs in, that bookmarklet will point to that new account. It won't point to the prior account. So it's all based on log in, log out.
Okay. Somebody asked when you were demoing the Summon integration if end users have found it confusing to have the upper right login for Flow and also have a login that would be for their off-campus access. Have you gotten any feedback on that?
They haven't said it's confusing to them. I think that the one piece of feedback I've gotten and that I agree with is that, that login link up in the corner needs a little more verbiage around it, like login to what. So for sure, we're looking at better ways to explain what that link is, what it does, what it doesn't do, to make it a little more powerful. We wanted with that first integration to not be overly obtrusive. We wanted to sort of, bring it into the product, get that feedback, and then find the right next step. We've obviously got a lot of it. Everybody who's on this call today, and users, and really, they're great about providing that feedback. So we have our next steps there. You're going to see a little bit better language around that login link coming soon. So.
Okay. Somebody asked, many of our users are doing systematic reviews, and Refworks is powerful enough to support them. Will Flow be powerful enough to support rigorous systematic reviews?
It's one of our roadmap goals for sure. It's one of the strong things that Refworks, you're right to acknowledge, has done. Flow certainly didn't grow from that, set of features. But as I mentioned briefly on this call, and you guys will hear more about this over the coming months, one of my primary goals is to really align the two products tighter. So long term, yes, Flow will be able to do that kind of work.
Okay, the next question was around the Google Docs integration. They asked, do you have to have the same login for Flow as you have for Google Docs, or
No.
how are the two accounts combined?
They are they're not connected. You don't have to have the same login. You would create your Flow account. The only barrier you're going to have as a user that you have to have that institutional email or be a subscribing institution to get that access. But no, you create your Flow account. Once you've done that and signed up, they're joined.
Okay. Somebody asked, can Flow be purchased without Refworks?
Yes, absolutely.
Another question was around copyright. So obviously that's a concern within for the librarians. Can you elaborate on how Flow handles and addresses copyright?
Yeah, I didn't go deeply into that, so I'll give you a good answer. But part of it is also visual. In Flow, we have some levels of control over how that full text is shared. The base case for us was one where we wanted to make sure that users were able to collaborate on that full text and really have a range, but not be offensive. And what I mean by offensive is the printing and the downloading, the ability to take that item away. The way I look at it is, we're not creating a file sharing network here. We don't want, a place where you post stuff and there's some weird way that you can somehow blow it out to everybody who's part of that service. So the first thing we did was we suppressed the ability of users to print or download shared full text if you're not at the same institution. Make some judgment calls around, what's okay within the institution. But we said, by and large, if you're at the same institution, your rights are likely the same. So, you have those capabilities. Beyond those walls, no, you can't do that. We also give users control. Users have the ability to say, I don't want to give full text rights to that person. I don't want them to be able to annotate or to edit that full text. Just read it or see it. So there's those first levels of control there. And this, again, some of it is visual, and I can certainly, there's other demos of me doing that out there around the internet. And you can also yourself get an account and check that out, what we're doing. One thing to say is we will be doing more there as well. We will be giving some more administrative controls around that sharing, again, based on user feedback, some of those things. So one of them will likely be the ability to suppress full text sharing beyond the institution altogether. Just those kinds of controls that we think will be important down the road. But we started with a base set on saying, okay, while we're not clearing copyright, we are sensitive to some of those institutional boundaries. And we wanted to reflect that in the product from day one. So it does.
Okay. Somebody else asked, is there a need to authenticate for full text within Flow?
Well, the only need, your need to authenticate for full text, I mean, any of the full text you're going to bring to Flow is going to come from somewhere. So save the flow that I showed, any of our saving mechanisms. The bottom line is if you can't authenticate to see that full text somehow, Flow's not going to do it for you. Flow's not going to get you through any of those doors. Um, so, I don't know if that answers the question, but like if I'm in ProQuest, I'm on a ProQuest database, Flow's not going to get me into that ProQuest database. I have to have access to it to save that full text. If I can see it, Flow will save it. That's kind of the way to look at it. But I have to be able to see it. Flow's not going to open a door for me.
Okay. Somebody asked, one of the features that we like about Refworks is the Ref Share feature. What type of sharing options are available in Flow?
Yeah, lots. The key ones are, and I kind of went through them a little bit, but just to reiterate, you as a user have a couple ways you can share. You can share individually. So what I mean by that is, say I'll use a use case. I'm a professor. I have a class of 25 students. I want to share a reading list of items. Could be full text mixed with non-full text, whatever. I want to share a list with those students. I have the ability to enter those email addresses of that class and to share that with those students with certain levels of rights. I can choose to let those students only read what I've put there. I can choose to let those students read or annotate, a little highlighting and noting that I showed, let them do that. Or I can say to them, okay, I've put a list of 10 suggested readings out here. These are meant to sort of prime the pump. What I want from you guys is I want 40 readings. You can keep mine or delete them, so giving them the ability to add their own items to that. Again, all the same rules apply around institutions, but really being able to work that list. The important thing to always know about Flow, and some people see it as an annoyance, but it's an annoyance for a reason, is when I'm sharing those items, I'm not able to take those items and make them part of my account, like pull them away from that share. They only exist for me in the share unless that was mine in the first place. So you're not able to sort of, even in the institution, grab and take that stuff. You just can't have it. You can have it in the context of a share. I think it's important. I mean, we get people saying that, they want to be able to do that, and I get it. But you can also understand why we didn't start there. We wanted to stop that proliferation. So those are the personal ones. Then I have the ability to institutionally share. I can make something available to everyone at my institution to see. Those are read-only. There's no other option there. Those are just read-only shares. You can't take them. You can't edit them. You can't do any of that stuff. You can just read the stuff that's in there. Those are the mechanisms that are in place today.
Okay, we do have a couple more questions to go through, but before we get to those, I just wanted to point out that we have added a program evaluation within the web links. We'd really appreciate your feedback on the short survey that we've put together, just to let us know what you thought of today's presentation and any other comments about the products that Eric covered today. So Eric, a couple other questions that came through. Somebody noted other types of bookmarklets that I have used with the other products do not grab the PDF when going through the proxy server. What about the Flow bookmarklet?
Same challenges. You heard me mention briefly that we're looking into a browser extension. Not looking into it. We're actually developing a full browser extension for that feature. What that means to everybody on the call is that, there are some key challenges with the bookmarklet. The first thing we wanted to have was something that didn't have to be installed, and bookmarklets are great for that. They're simple. The browser extension is installed in a way. I mean, it gets aligned with your browser. So it's a little more detailed than just dragging something, but the power that comes with that is much greater. Helping get through those proxy servers, helping get more full text, working on more sites. The wins we've seen for what we've developed already are significant. We're, as you can tell, very far down that development path. I expect to have that out in the next few months. We're in testing with it now on Firefox and building it for Chrome and Safari as well. That's going to change the game. I really sense that is another thing I would be back out talking to folks about, because it is a meaningful change from even what the bookmarklet does. So you got more in your answer than I think you asked, but we have the same challenges with the bookmarklet. It's kind of the way it is. The browser extension is going to help with a lot of those challenges. I mean, nothing's perfect, but it is going to definitely move that forward and help with that process.
Okay, somebody else asked, can you easily export large lists of citations from non-ProQuest databases directly into Flow?
Yeah. Absolutely. All the direct exports, and just to ground that a little bit, all of the direct exports that Refworks has in the marketplace, there's lots of sites that have, export to Refworks, including Google Scholar. All of those will work and go point directly to Flow, so you can do that. And again, if here's the use case that I see lots of libraries doing today. So I get my import filter going, I get my direct export going, I get my data, my metadata into Flow. Then what I've done is configured as a library my link resolver, which works and configures into Flow. Now my users go find that full text. A lot of that going on because it does a couple things. I mean, if you're voicing copyright concerns and those pieces, just how you're bringing stuff in, there's a really nice use case for sort of that open web grabbing and then making sure that users are getting that full text from the right sources, from the sources that you guys advocate. I've seen a lot of institutions, and when I've been on site over the last few months, spending a lot of time in libraries, seeing how people are kind of using that tool, and that's one of the things I see them doing. Full metadata from one source, link resolver to full text, joining the two up real easily, and then having that complete record. Again, I think there'll be better ways, and there are, but there will be more emergent ways to do that. But folks are finding their ways to sort of get that data together.
Okay, somebody else asked, what do you envision for the possibility of Flow working with third parties such as Orchid or Vivo?
I think it's pretty good. I mean, we've established, Orchid alignment with Pivot. Yeah, we've got, we have, Flow is built to be sort of one of those tools that aligns with other things, both from an analytics front to a data front, to a scholar profile front. We have lots of more integration and alignment plans on our radar screen, not the least of which, as I mentioned, the Refworks and Flow work that we've been after and continue to be after. So yeah, definitely stuff you'll see from us down the road. How it manifests, how might Flow interact with Pivot, which already has ties to Orchid, that remains to be seen. But certainly stuff that I've talked about with other product managers, and that's, nothing's out of the question, and a lot, it's just a matter of how fast can we run in how many directions.
Okay, we have just under 5 minutes left. I did want to remind everybody again of the program evaluation. If you could take just a moment to complete that before we finish up with today's webinar, we'd really appreciate it. We have time for a few more questions. If we didn't get to your question today, we will definitely follow up with you via email to make sure that your questions are addressed. So Eric, somebody asked, the institutional tracking and reporting within Flow is nice. Is ProQuest also aggregating these stats across the system?
Yeah, we are in the early stages of that larger, I think I'm reading the question the right way, or hearing the question the right way, a larger sort of analytics story across more than one ProQuest property. The answer is yeah. I've actually been sitting in on some meetings where that's one of our goals is, we have these pockets of data that we provide from the database and from Summon and from, Intoda and all these other places. And really there's one larger data story for our subscribing institutions. So we're working on new ways to help tell a complete and coherent story, something very much top of mind to our One ProQuest vision. And again, that ecosystem, bringing those products together for you at the institution, having them make sense. So yes, what the timing around that is, it's a little early for me to say. I sort of have one voice among many in that room, but it's very much top of mind. I mean, I even have for Flow proper a list of 5 or 6 at least key additional analytics that I'd like to see us bringing to the product in the first quarter of next year. So data is key. We know that. And then telling you the right data stories across this ecosystem is going to be critical. We're also aware of that. So look for that from us in the coming future. I know that, again, it's very much top of mind around this organization right now.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question. Somebody had asked, do you see products like Flow replacing LMS products currently being used?
Yeah, I think there's an alignment there. I think there's a merger. I think really what you'll see is these products sort of, what feels like separate products today, maybe really aren't so separate. They really are more tightly coupled than we think. And yeah, I could see it for sure. I mean, I think, one of the key things for Flow is, we're talking about reading lists and talking about robust reading lists and really, going after that and then integrating with the LMS. But at some point, you kind of have to wonder, if these tools don't just become one thing. Yeah, I could see that. It is interesting though, and not lost on me that vendors like us and the LMS vendors tend to not be the same people, which is interesting. Um, so I don't know how that plays out organizationally. Maybe some major acquisitions down the road, but there's definite connections. It's one of the things that we certainly sense and look at, and everybody goes, interesting, and then you go off and do something else. Um, but I definitely feel that connectedness. These are becoming so close to the classroom. A product like Flow, I talk to a lot of faculty, um, and I know one of the polls, one of the key challenges for a lot of folks on this call is user engagement. Well, for me, one of the missing ingredients many times is that faculty engagement, is helping the faculty member understand how a product like this can be used in the classroom setting. And if you have one faculty member using it and getting engaged with it, how many users does that represent? It's a great path towards increasing user engagement. Is really having a product that the faculty see as usable and sane and built for them a little bit, and so that gets close to the LMS, right? I think you'll see that emergence. Somebody's going to pull that off, and it may be us, but I definitely think there's connections there.
All right. Thank you, Eric. That's
Yeah.
about all the time that we have today for questions. If we didn't address your question on the call today, we will follow up with you via email. And with that, I'll pass it back to Jen to close us out of today's session.
Thanks, everybody.
Great, thank you. I just want to give Eric a virtual round of applause for spending time with us today and sharing some great information. And just as a reminder to everyone, we have recorded today's program, so be on the lookout for a follow-up email from ACRL and Choice that will include instructions on how to access the archive version. Thanks again for all our